Welcome to part 2 of This Week in Common Sense for the second week of March 2020. Paul Jacob has talked about his Monday and Friday pieces, and now it is time to talk about Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. Paul, we seem to be talking about election interference.
I had the view when they first talked about Russian interference that I think a lot of people had, which was, the Russians hacked our way too easy to hack, it appears from different things I've read, election systems. So somehow they got into, and there were reports about them trying to get into different systems. But I thought, apparently they were able to get in somewhere. Well, no, of course, the Russians did not hack and change a single vote once it was cast. What was being alleged is that their somewhat goofy Facebook ads, which they spent several $100,000, as I understand it, caused people to be even more at each other's throats than they would have been anyway. And of course, they had armies. I don't know how big their armies were, but armies of people, trolls online, trying to get people angry and fight with each other. Gee, talk about doing what Americans can do for themselves. If you're opposed to, and I'm not encouraging any Russian trolls to come try to start fights, but if you want to dampen that, stop getting angry and fighting, and there are certain things we can do, but it's not changing the election or hacking the election. It's more voices, and they're profoundly dumb voices, profoundly negative voices intended to create problems and fights and anger and so on, and resist. There'd been a huge resistance to Trump after he was elected. Let's resist the Russian desire, Russian government's desire to make us mad at each other. But of course, the story wasn't, hey, we finally figured out there had been a lot of Russian news. We've been covering some of that all along, not as much as the crazy mainstream media. But what sparked Tuesday's commentary, running interference, was some young people who came to the U.S. from Canada legally, were here in the country, and were agitating, actively campaigning for Bernie Sanders and for socialism. They like socialism. They think we should like it too. And, I think a lot of people say, what are they? They don't have no right to speak. They're from somewhere else. Get them the heck out of here. But as I pointed out, I think more voices are better than fewer voices. And I have so often in my, life, in my career working in politics, kind of seen it from the other way. I did a lot of work in Oklahoma on a petition drive. The Attorney General in Oklahoma decided he wanted to throw myself and 2 other people in prison for 10 years for running a petition drive that he said we didn't do the right way. Even though, of course, the people on the ground, I live in Virginia, not Oklahoma, I was on the ground very little, but the people who were on the ground had asked state officials, hey, here's how we're doing it. Does that work? They were told yes. The AG said no after the fact and wanted to put us in prison because we were outside agitators. And we've heard it all along. I was called an outside agitator in Nebraska, where one time I was testifying after a petition drive that I had managed, and was asked, what my experience was in Nebraska. And, I had expected different questions about that particular drive, but hadn't expected the questions about, my history in Nebraska. And I started recalling the different campaigns I'd been involved in 92, in 94, in 96, in 98, in 2000, in 2002, 2010 was the year that I was doing the campaign. So, I think I have the bona fides, the street cred to be an outside agitator. And I think we have almost nothing to fear from outside agitators. Sure, they may be right, they may be wrong, but more voices are better. We want all the voices heard. We want to be able to get all the information. We don't want some censor, be it the government or anybody else. Now, the government has no right to do it. Some private, Google, somebody else, Facebook, they can be a stupid censor, and hopefully we can knock them out of business if that's what they do, and we can find an alternative. But regardless of who it is, I want the voices. I don't want somebody else limiting what I can hear. And so as much as I think these young people from Canada are politically misguided, let them speak, and let all of us speak all over the country. One of the beautiful things about America is that states cannot wall off influence from other people in other states. And of course, the interesting thing to me, and we had a link in that piece, Running Interference, at thisiscommonsense.com. But one of the interesting things is I put a link in about the fact that I don't want them voting. In other words, if you're here visiting from Uzbekistan, I think you should be free to say anything you want on an American street, just like any American. But I don't want you to go to the polls and vote, because I don't think that's your right. I think voting should be the exclusive right of citizens of the United States. Now, I'm not for walling off our country. I am for immigration. I think immigration is a wonderful thing. I'd like to, get rid of the welfare state. I certainly think that a in-between intermediate step would be to say, as the Trump administration has, but maybe even go further, they have pushed something that the left has gone apoplectic about, and the courts have thus far sided with the Trump administration, but where you will take a demerit if you're in this country seeking citizenship and you go on the public dole. And I think that what we ought to do is say that anyone coming into this country as an immigrant is not allowed to go on the public dole, and that maybe a smart step would be to say you need a sponsor. And that sponsor could be an individual or a family or a church or some other organization that takes responsibility. I first heard about this because my father mentioned that when his father came from Ireland to Canada and then from Canada to the United States as an immigrant, he had a sponsor at the church, at the Catholic church that he went to, that was responsible for the first 5 years he was here to take care of him if he lost his job and was penniless, so that he wouldn't be on the street and so that he wouldn't be a public burden. And it seems to me that makes a lot of sense. It allows the American people, by our generosity and our commitment, I like commitment, it allows us to determine how many people can come in. And it says to the person who says, hey, I don't want a bunch of people coming in and costing me an arm and a leg to take care of them. Don't worry, you're not going to be out a penny. And it allows the people who say, you know what, I want my relatives to come in, or I want someone I don't even know, but I love people. I want that diversity and new people to get a chance to be part of this society, to put their money where their mouth is. And of course, this gentleman at the church, I don't think was ever out a nickel on my grandfather. He was a pretty hardworking guy. And that would be the expectation. But I think something like that makes a lot of sense. And I have been working with activists in North Dakota in 2018 to pass a constitutional amendment there that says you have to be a citizen to vote. There are non-citizens voting on school issues in San Francisco today. And in fact, in San Francisco, they seem pretty proud that it's not just non-citizens who are here legally, but also if you're here illegally and you're not a citizen, you're also allowed to vote in those elections in San Francisco. There are 11 cities in Maryland, and I have friends who were part of the effort to bring non-citizen voting to Tacoma Park, Maryland, and applaud it coming to these other cities. And I understand their position. They look at it and they say, well, these people are living here. They should have some vote on what's happening in the schools they send their children to, what taxes they're paying as people in this community. But I look at it a different way, and I say, If they want to be a voting citizen of this country, let's make it as easy as possible for them to get here on their own accord and by people who agree to help them, not by the public, whether they like it or not. And let's make it as easy for them to get here and become citizens as is reasonable. I like that process, and I like them becoming citizens. And in fact, a lot of the leaders in this effort to make voting clearly only for citizens are people who've come in from other countries legally and have become citizens and say, wait a second, this is part of what it means to be a citizen. So it's interesting when we look at interference in the election. So often it doesn't seem to be a principled stand that says, here's where the rules should be. It's almost a pick and choose. Some of the people who have screamed the loudest about Russian interference in our election believe that if you sneak into the country, a week before the election from Russia or anywhere else, you ought to be able to cast a vote. Somehow you can't run a Facebook ad. You can't comment on a Facebook post, but if you go down to the polls and click the lever for somebody, that's A-okay. And it just seems to me that we need reform in our immigration process, and that one of the ways to get at that reform is to be reasonable and cause people to have some comfort that we have a reasonable process that makes sense, where we allow people to come in. This is a country of immigrants. Of course, we continue to have immigration. And of course, we have a process for those people to become citizens, because they aren't second-class people. They're first-class people. We're glad to have them here. Let's have a sensible process. But that sensible process doesn't mean, hey, we just want to willy-nilly give everybody who's here on vacation or who snuck into the country a vote. I think that would go a long way. And the other thing is, we have to be committed to free speech. The greatest gift this country has ever given the world, bigger in my mind than winning World War II against the Nazis and Imperial Japan, is the whole idea of freedom of speech. If you had American freedom of speech in China, communist China, if you had it in Russia and it was respected, Putin would be out on his ear. People could connect with each other. Xi Jinping would be gone very soon, because the only thing that keeps him in power is the batons that they beat people with, and the ability to throw people in prison for saying something that their fellow citizens are going to take and run with and say, wait a second, that's right. We're human beings. We deserve some say in our government. So freedom of speech is wonderful. Let's stop being afraid of voices that we disagree with. Let's welcome them. But let's also have reasonable rules so that we have people coming to our country who want to be Americans, who want to be citizens. They become citizens. They cast a vote. We make decisions as American citizens, and we move to the next election.
And speaking of elections, we have one coming on. I call it Death Race 2020.
I wanted to steal that, Tim, and now you say you said it, and so I can't steal it now. Thanks a lot.
You can borrow it. I think I may not even be the first, but I mean, it's such an obvious joke. But Wednesdays was called Mistaken Misogyny, and it's about Death Race 2020 and the vanishing of the candidacy of Elizabeth Warren.
Elizabeth Warren is, we have so much consternation when a woman is not elected that somehow it's sexism. And of course, not that there isn't some level of sexism. All of these isms, there are levels of it in our society. So it makes no sense to say, oh, there's no sexism at all. But if you call everything sexism, then automatically nothing is sexism. And so how do you fight sexism? I think that the nationwide hand-wringing about misogyny after Elizabeth Warren's very badly run campaign fails is a huge negative, because it sends a message that we will claim sexism about anything. I think most objective viewers know Elizabeth Warren, she stumbled with her dumb, I'm going to drink a beer and try to pretend that I'm like you. Because people don't like that sort of pandering. Luckily, she moved beyond that. She also had the, Trump calling her Pocahontas, and she claimed to be a Native American and did seem to get some economic career benefits from that, because Harvard made a big deal out of her being a person of color, even though, you look at her and you say she's from Oklahoma and she is as white as Snow White. But it seems like where she increased her support was by coming up with all these plans. Now, I hated every plan she came up with. I disagree with her in a fundamental principled policy basis. So it doesn't matter how much I like her or don't like her. And I think most people who are politically very involved, we're not deciding whether we think someone's nice or not nice, or gets it, or is with us, or whether we'd like to have a beer with them or not. We want them to run the country, and we want to know what policies they're going to have. So Elizabeth Warren was never on my list to consider because I saw her policies. But it's interesting to me that her campaign started to catch some energy. She was first in the polls in Iowa and New Hampshire, I believe around the end of the summer and the first of the fall. And I think it was because she was coming up with plans, and people respected someone who was thinking about these things and coming up with plans. And if you liked her plans, great. She's that type of person. And then, of course, she's bumping up against Bernie Sanders. And whatever you think about Bernie Sanders, and I don't like him very much because I'm not a socialist and I disagree with his views, but he is authentic. And when Medicare for All started to get some pushback from the so-called moderates, who I don't think are very moderate, but pretended to be because there was a lane there, when the moderates started to say, wait a second, you're going to throw everybody off their health care plans and have a one-size-fits-all, that doesn't make sense. That is kind of a socialist, communist type big government plan. And they said it's going to cost a lot of money. You're going to have to raise taxes on the middle class. It's okay if you raise taxes on rich people because they're bad, but the middle class is wonderful. So, and of course, in America, the middle class is you and everybody in the middle class. So everybody seems to think they're in the middle class. I wouldn't be surprised if Bloomberg and Bill Gates sometimes say, "Oh, I'm in the middle class, aren't I?" But so it's a little bit of a fiction, and they play to it. But she couldn't admit that taxes would go up for the middle class. And Bernie Sanders, to his credit, and it's why, as much as I do not like his politics, I have some respect for the man. He said, yes, taxes are going to go up. And he explained, I don't think he's right, but he explained that in his view, your taxes would go up, but the benefits you'd get by not having to pay co-pays and not having to pay whatever you pay of your insurance, whether it's all of it or none of it, depending on what your employer might pick up, you're going to be better off. And it was a legitimate answer, as much as I think you won't be better off. And I just have this one challenge. Think about the government programs that have been instituted that make you better off. That the taxes you're paying to get those services are a great deal. Well, if you see a lot of those where you're getting great deals from the government, you might believe Bernie. I can't think of one where the deal is a great deal where I'm paying pennies and getting hundreds of dollars back. That hasn't worked for me. But he was straightforward. He didn't dodge the question. And of course, Elizabeth Warren was all over the map on the question. It was, oh no, I'm not going to raise your taxes. And then, I'm re-looking at it. And all of a sudden, what was her strength, her plans, and the fact that she was prepared became her weakness, because it showed she wasn't really prepared. She had to go back to the drawing board. And that ended her ascendance in the polls. And she started to fall like a rock. And I think Bernie got the better part of the progressive vote. She also floated the thing, and I have to think, you know, because I'm in Washington, and that's almost 99.999% of the time, as FDR said, nothing happens by accident in politics. And there was an op-ed in Huffington Post which alleged that Bernie had told Elizabeth Warren that a woman couldn't win, meaning kind of by, you know, connotation that he doesn't believe women can win and he didn't want a woman on the ticket and so on and so on. He denied it, and he was asked about it and denied it in the debate. And she was given every opportunity in that one debate to hit him on it if she wanted to, and she didn't seem to hit him. And look, Elizabeth Warren, if you saw her hit Bloomberg, you know she knows how to hit somebody. I'm talking verbally. And so then after the debate, she walks across the stage with the mic still hot, live, recording, and she says, "I think you called me a liar on national television to Bernie." Well, this is a great story. I mean, you have all the debate, but now you get to see behind the scenes. And so this has maximum attention. She goes after Bernie, and Bernie says, "Let's not talk about this now," something to that effect, and basically sloughs it off and let's talk about it later. And she seems to accept that at the moment, and it's over. And I think that sent a heck of a message that, wait a second, she's not as strong an individual and an advocate as she should be. She didn't advocate for herself. She made she was livid that he would make that charge, even though he didn't really call her a liar. He simply said the story wasn't true. And it kind of makes it clear that she did float the story because she's saying he called her a liar. But it showed the underbelly of someone who wasn't straightforward and clear and completely honest about the situation. And I think it did her in. So I think that's why she lost. I think it had almost nothing to do with her being a woman, although somewhere somebody said, "I don't like women, I won't vote for her." I'm sure that happened. There's 320 million people in the country. Surely that was in somebody's head. The interesting thing is, we're talking about the Democrats. And in the general election, Democrats, Republicans, independents, everybody, a majority of voters are women. But women tend to skew Democratic and men Republican. And so in the Democratic primary, it's even a bigger majority for women. And so what we're supposed to believe is that women are so misogynist. They hate women so much that they won't vote for a woman. Now, we just had an election in 2018 where women candidates won all over the place. So it just doesn't seem to make any sense. And yet we have to hear it again and again. I think it does a tremendous disservice because, look, we have sexism in our society. I reared 3 daughters with a little help from my wife. I mean, she was there from time to help. And see, honey, I gave you credit. I am just so dead. Anyway, she doesn't watch these whole things, so I'm probably safe. Anyway, rearing 3 daughters, one of the biggest concerns I had and still have for your daughters is that I think there is a deficit of expectations for young women in society. I think that they are not reminded enough that we're expecting big things from them, that we think they can do anything they want to do, that if they put their mind to something, they can achieve it. I know as a kid, I got that message from my parents all the time. And I want you to know, although I think it may have been slightly less for my sisters just because there was more of the homemaker role. My mom was a homemaker, a great one. And my dad worked and so on. And so that was kind of how it was set up. So maybe there was a little less of it. But boy, I think my sisters, and my daughters too, had the expectation from their father, from my father and from me, that I expect great things. I'm not telling you, oh, you ought to do this, whatever you do. And that was the beauty with my parents, frankly. I think it's the best thing that they did is that they never suggested what we do, but it was always clear that they expected us to think what we were doing was super important, that they wanted us to believe whatever we chose, that we could do it, and that it was important that we give it our all. In other words, it's just empowering. You're a person and you're a great person. Go get them. And that message has to be sent to women as much as it's sent to men. And I think throughout history and to this day, it's not sent as much. Now, there's all kinds of messages now that women are great and man, maybe not so much. Those aren't very helpful, I think, to women, because they're saying women are great as a gender, as a sex, but not so much you as an individual happen to be female and you're wonderful and you can do anything. So I don't think it helps women as much. And I think it's actually a real negative for men. I think men are sort of put down in our society. And I don't think it matters as much to men who are adults, but I think to boys growing up, subtle messages like that come through. And I don't think it's a healthy message. So I think we have a problem there. The other problem we have that I think is almost exclusively a problem for young women and not for young men. And we have enough problems going through puberty without any help. But it is the whole body image, the whole every woman is supposed to be some skinny model on the cover of some stupid magazine. I say stupid because I don't buy those magazines, but I'm not saying you're stupid if you do. People can like fashion. There's nothing, this is not a hit on fashion or a hit on people trying to look nice or be healthy, especially be healthy. But it's a hit, I think, on just a complete obsession about looks. And I think it is destructive. It's hard, no matter what parents and churches and other civic organizations do. If the TV's on, you're getting that message constantly. And you get that message in society even if you kill your television. So I think there are some problems with sexism. I think when we go apoplectic as a society and when our media goes apoplectic because a woman who ran a very poor campaign for the presidency loses, we are not helping the cause of equal rights. We are setting it back. And then here's the kicker to mistaken misogyny. So we have a society that doesn't give women their due, that's misogynistic. Even women are misogynistic because they're the majority of voters in the Democratic primaries and they didn't vote for Elizabeth Warren. How dare they not vote for her? How dare a woman vote for a man? And I've heard some women say they voted for a man because they thought only a man could beat Trump. And so they didn't vote for the woman maybe they wanted to. Well, I don't usually blame people for voting however they vote. I can take them to task for their analysis. I can take their candidate to task, but I think we're all trying to defend ourselves in a rigged system, not of our making. And so I have a certain sympathy for people voting how they think is the best to protect themselves. But I think that whole argument is a self-fulfilling prophecy. And if the problem is women are too scared of the one candidate, so they're going to rush to embrace misogyny, well, I think we found the problem. But here is the kicker. The kicker is there is still a woman in the race. There is still a woman running, and that woman, Tulsi Gabbard, who's a congresswoman from Hawaii, received a delegate on Super Tuesday. She received a delegate from American Samoa. Bloomberg, his big delegate, he got the other one from American Samoa. And that qualified her for the next debate. But of course, the DNC, which constantly pays lip service to equal rights for women, has changed their rules midstream to say that no longer qualifies you to be in the debate. And why did they do that? Because politically, they don't like Tulsi Gabbard. And why? Because she's against regime change wars. Now, some people may disagree. Oh, they don't like her for this reason or that. Please leave messages in the comments. I would love to hear people tell me why they dislike Tulsi Gabbard for any reason other than her main campaign theme, which has been stop regime change wars, because it leads me to believe that the higher ups, the vaulted insiders of the Democratic Party, like war. They like regime change wars because they have gone to great lengths. And the mainstream media that leans Democrat, and leans might be a nice way of saying that, leans and falls over Democrat.
Maybe it leans from the other side.
Yeah. Well, that's, as we've said several times in recent weeks, the Democrats are not kind of leaning on it. They're to the left of the Democrats. They're to the left of the liberal Democrats. And there was a story, I won't go into it because I don't have it in front of me and I don't have all the names and stuff, but there was a reporter who came out and was outed by James O'Keefe and Project Veritas, saying that he's a socialist. And he was, I believe it was ABC, but I probably shouldn't have said that because I don't know for sure. But he was reassigned because he admitted that he was a socialist. And I'm thinking, well, it's not a crime to be a socialist. We live in a free country, at least, for the most part, kind of. And so he shouldn't have been reassigned. Can't he still be objective? Well, if he can't be, I'd like to know the political affiliations of the rest of people covering these stories, because I'm convinced they're overwhelmingly on the left, to the left of the Democratic Party, and most of them are socialists. And so what it looked like to me was they were covering their behind. They didn't want it out there that, yes, we're all socialists. And so when we cover something, we're going to have that lean. And of course, you'd think, well, then they would support Bernie Sanders, wouldn't they? Well, no, because they're socialists who want to be in power. So they're afraid, and I think they may be miscalculating, but they're afraid that they can't possibly win with Bernie Sanders. And so they're wanting to go to Joe Biden. And of course, as the Democrats wanted to get rid of Sanders because he's a socialist, you didn't notice them showing how all of his ideas are so terrible because they endorse most of his ideas. So it's what's happening in the Democratic Party and with the media is really, it is depressing. It's a little bit sick. We're being fed political information by people who want the Democrats to win against all, no matter what, they want the Democrats to win and would like the Democrats to govern from a position far to the left of where most Democrats are in this country. And if you start watching the news with that in mind, I think you'll agree, and I think you'll have a better chance to kind of discern what's actually being said and what's actually happening. But here they are, the media ignoring Tulsi Gabbard, a woman, and the Democratic Party changing its rules to keep her out of the debate. And then you have woman after woman candidate endorsing Biden, not Tulsi, and frankly saying that there's no more women in the debates. There's no more women running. This is the last woman has been defeated. Well, that is false. That's a lie. And so what is going on? We have to be for equal rights. Therefore, if a woman isn't elected, it's a crime against humanity by the people of America, who are a bunch of Neanderthal boobs who don't care about equal rights. At the same time that those people are completely ignoring and pushing out the last woman in the race. So this is our world, and it's an ugly, ugly situation.
Now, I have a theory that maybe you can tell me if it's misogynistic or not. It's a theory I have. I know why I didn't like Elizabeth Warren, just not even considering what she said. It's the way she said it. She struck me as phony from day one, but phony in not a lying way. Like, I mean, you know, in a sense, almost all these people are phony, right? They're not really. I mean, Biden is Biden really an earnest person? I don't know. I mean, it strikes me that politicians know how to lie, but she came across as someone who was talking to her dog. You know, that kind of voice that. Well, you know, I think of also a grade school principal a woman grade school principal might sound like this, a very earnest but it's not earnest. It's an act. And she was a Harvard professor. I don't believe she talked to her students like that. I can't believe that she talked to her students like she talks to the people of the United States. Now, I'd like to hear somebody tell me different, but I just think that's not true. I believe she has an act.
Well, you know, it's interesting. I mean, look, we had during Obama's administration, he would go to a Southern black church, and he would speak with an accent that he didn't have, which I thought was just a little bizarre. You know, I guess he's trying to fit in or something, but it's not like he wasn't going to be well received, but it just was strange. And of course, Hillary Clinton sometimes, and his accent was a lot better than hers, but she would do the same thing. And I just thought, you know, this is pandering in an offensive way to me. But I know a lot of people. In fact, I've said the same thing, that she talks kind of like a school marm. So maybe I don't agree with you in the sense that I suspect, you know, maybe I see more a second grade teacher. I didn't like my second grade teacher very much, and so any teacher I really don't like, I see as a second grade teacher. But I saw it kind of like that. Now, obviously, if you're lecturing to a Harvard class, you would think you wouldn't be talking like you're talking to second graders, but there was an element of that. I guess my point is, I think that if she would have been saying, I love term limits, I love initiative and referendum, I believe in limited government where people's human rights are to be respected, and we don't think government should control all of our society, I would have found her speaking style to be really not so bad. What are you talking about, Tim? How could you attack her? She's a wonderful woman. And so I don't think I can really come at it, you know, clean in the sense of without any bias. But I do think she had a touch of kind of a school marm type thing. And it's look at Pete Buttigieg. He never caught on with a very broad slice of the electorate. Very articulate. I found him to be the most frightening because I think he's a big government guy, but he spoke so smartly. And so I could see him getting in and kind of being whatever anybody wanted, at least appearing that way. But I think that his speaking style was too intellectual, was too sharp, that if you were coaching him to win the election, you might have encouraged him to stumble on his words every once in a while, to make people feel more at home. I used to, when I was fighting against draft registration as a young man, Ronald Reagan, running for president, said the draft or draft registration destroys the very values our society is committed to defending. I said that quote so many times that I've never had to look it up. I mean, that was like 40 years ago, something like that, or yesterday, one of the two. And so I kind of, you know, I had that memorized, and I used to inject a little stutter in that because I felt like I'm giving it without any emotion because it's so rote that I need to somehow stop to give it emphasize and to allow my own mind to say, oh, that's right, let's really emphasize this point. And so when someone says, oh, Elizabeth Warren comes off kind of like a school marm, I think it's easy for every kind of left-wing feminist to say, see, they always characterize us women that way. But of course, men are being characterized in exactly the same way. Does Michael Bloomberg not care about anybody? I heard a lot of people after that first debate say, he seems so aloof, he doesn't care. It's not that he doesn't care, it's the way that he spoke did not express that. And so I do think that Elizabeth Warren's biggest problem was things she did, not how she spoke. Not that she was a woman, certainly, but all of that weighs in. And so I didn't particularly like her speaking style. And frankly, I do like Tulsi Gabbard's speaking style. Now, sometimes I think I like it because she's forceful, she's clear. You don't wonder after she's finished her sentence, which is almost always not a run-on sentence. I'm trying to learn from her. And but you know what she meant. You don't question what she meant. I got it. So she's very clear and forceful. I think that sometimes she comes off as too scripted, too much that she has the same line coming back and back. But, if you're trying to get a message through, you do have to repeat that same line. Maybe she needs to steal my little trick and have just a little stutter every once in a while, or a little pause that makes it to where people can catch up and say, oh, she is human. But
she seems more presidential than anybody else in the race. I of course, maybe I just want to see her for 4 years rather than anybody else. Not because I agree with her policies other than on war, but I mean, she's very articulate. She looks good. And she doesn't engage in all the weirdnesses that everybody else does. Can you imagine Bernie for 4 years? That is an old grump. I mean, on stylistic grounds, I don't like him. I mean, I actively dislike Bernie Sanders. And if Biden didn't seem senile, I probably would like him. I have to admit, I probably would like Biden.
He's the most likable candidate, I think, partly because he's trying so hard to be liked. I mean, he's constantly trying to do the I'm good old Joe, lunchbox Joe. And I think he's put more effort, maybe because he couldn't articulate a policy if his life depended on it. So he's trying to be well liked. But, it's funny. If you've never met somebody, you don't know what they're really like. And you don't find that out from TV. I know all kinds of people say, oh, I really like this one congressman because they see him do this on TV and he says something and it's great and so on. And like I've had some interaction and I kind of think, oh my goodness, this guy is completely duplicitous and narcissistic and, because I've had some interaction with him. So it's I think people who say, oh, Joe's a likable guy or even have likability as a factor, I just think that's a factor you can know nothing about, and that really, in essence, is not part of the job description of being president. You're not on trolling on Facebook trying to make new friends constantly. You got other jobs to do.
George Washington would not survive the television era or the internet era. I mean, he was beloved by Americans, but he would be considered stiff and unknowable now.
Yes. No, it is. I think there's been a lot said and written about how our politics has changed in the TV era and even in the radio era, some from what it would have been in Washington's day, because you could hardly find a TV set or a radio in his day. I think also the likability shouldn't be a factor, and so all of that should kind of get thrown out the window. But I do think with someone like a Tulsi Gabbard, you have someone who is outside of the hierarchy. I think what Bernie had as an advantage in this race was that he wasn't a Democrat, in the same way that Trump took over the Republican Party, and one of his key calling cards is, I'm not really a Republican. And that says something about the state of our politics, that the Democrats, the most active, engaged Democrats, want someone who's not a Democrat and have no respect for their party hierarchy, and for absolutely valid reasons in my mind. And the same is true of Republicans, that the rank and file don't trust the RNC as far as they can throw it. And they're right, in my mind, not to trust the RNC. Now, I didn't vote for Trump. I'm not a big Trump fan. I look at what he's done that I think is good, like Neil Gorsuch. Did I mention Neil Gorsuch? And I look at stuff he's done that isn't so good, and frankly, I'm not surprised. but I think he's done better than the constant, he's crazy and so on. And maybe he is a little crazy. A lot of these people are not normal people. And I think the same is true with Bernie. The one thing I kind of like about Bernie is he's ideological. That's his number one bad thing, but it's also his number one good thing, because it tells me that if he did become president, that we could trust him to be good on the few things that he's good on, and we could raise an army of citizens to oppose him on his big government socialism. And I think it might create a huge groundswell for free market capitalism, not crony capitalism, free market capitalism. But we have to recognize both parties are frankly illegitimate among their own rank and file, and that we just spent a week hand-wringing about a woman not winning the presidency, and that was all about misogyny, even as we totally ignored and discounted the woman who's still in the race. So this is absurdity upon absurdity, and it would be humorous if we didn't have to live here. I wanted to revisit what's happening in Hong Kong. I think it's the most important event of the last year. I don't know how Hong Kong is able to maintain what level of freedom they have today against the Chinese Communist Party and the butchers of Beijing, but I am so admiring and so moved and inspired by their fight. And it is my fight. I think it is our fight. That is, as the commentary's title said, freedom's front lines. And because of coronavirus, which is a pretty darn serious thing, it's all over the world now, you would expect that there's not going to be as many mass protests and stuff. That doesn't really fit the script for fighting coronavirus. But of course, the Communist Party in China, who is the puppet master for Carrie Lam and the Hong Kong authorities, because their main demand is suffrage, that we get to vote for our leaders, basic democracy. Democracy 101 is all they're asking for. We want to elect our leaders because they know if they don't have that mechanism to control their own government, they've got no defense against China passing any law they want through the Hong Kong legislature. And so this is a fight about democracy and basic human rights. And I think Americans should be paying uber attention to it, because it's hugely important, not just to them, but to us. Because as we have talked about in previous weeks, the influence of China is not just something that should scare people in Hong Kong or Taiwan across the Taiwan Strait, where China keeps threatening to take them by force and snuff out their freedom and democracy. But they've got their tentacles in Australian universities, in American universities, the National Basketball Association, which is national, meaning the American National Basketball Association, can't say boo about China. Somebody in working for them says something about maybe we ought to respect democracy in Hong Kong. All of a sudden, our NBA is scared to death, walking on eggshells for the butchers of Beijing. And we have to recognize that's where we are in this world. China is number 2 economically. I'm beginning to think they're number 1 politically. And if they were peaceful and friendly, either to their own people or to other people, it'd be a different matter, but they're not. And so we have a serious, serious problem with what China controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, is doing in their own country, from concentration camps to selling body parts to, well, the list just goes on and on. You can't mention all the crimes against humanity that are being committed. We have to stop being asleep at the switch. And so I wanted to remind people that this is still happening in Hong Kong, and they bravely came out, partly because they were recognizing the death of a student who had fallen one story in a parking garage that was being cleared of protesters by the police in Hong Kong, who Amnesty International has come out and said, we need an independent investigation of the police in Hong Kong and the violence they are inflicting against peaceful demonstrators, as well as demonstrators who maybe spray paint or try to defend themselves from the authorities. And so they came out to recognize 4 months since this student died, had a candlelight vigil, and they couldn't have the candlelight vigil because the police broke it up. And the police said they found bomb-making material and bricks and all kinds of things that show that this was going to be violent. And so they then stopped the mourners and searched them. And of course, they arrested 40 people, but nobody for having any violent, they were arrested for illegal demonstration, not for any acts of violence, not for having any weapons on them. And so again, this is, I don't trust anything that I hear from the Hong Kong police, because you're really hearing it from the Chinese Communist Party. And it's all been full of what. So, and one of the most interesting things through the latter part of last year, as the protests continued, you see more things. Like I remember seeing the guy who was lit on fire by protesters. There was a video that was shown, I believe this was in November, of one gentleman being lit on fire. And it showed his chest engulfed in flames. And then there was never any rest of the story. What happened to this guy? Did he die? Did the people who lit him on fire, did they find him? Have they prosecuted them? And the fact that there was no news after that led me to believe, and I could be wrong, but I think if there's reason to look at it this way, I don't believe that really took place in the way that they said it took place, because there was no follow-up. Surely they would have said, oh, this man is badly scarred and look at the injuries and how terrible. It would have been a 2 or a 3 or an 8-day story. So we have to look at what they're saying and realize they don't tell the truth. And the biggest, I think, validation of the protests was the fact that I believe it was in early December, they had an election in Hong Kong. It was a local election. It wasn't Hong Kong-wide elections. It was elections across all of Hong Kong, but for local officials. And prior to this election, there were no pro-democracy people serving in these local councils. After the election, 87% of the seats were won by pro-democracy candidates. Now that tells you 2 things. It tells you that the pro-democracy movement is not being looked at as violent, destructive, rotten hoodlums by the people of Hong Kong. And it tells you that any time there is free voting, you are going to see candidates favoring democracy win. That means that all the propaganda about how terrible democracy is that you hear from the Communist Chinese government it hits people in Hong Kong and I think in China itself and everywhere else in the world as complete BS. So don't forget about Hong Kong. As they say there, stand with Hong Kong, fight for freedom. And boy, what they're doing, who knows how that will end, but it is I think a very important battle for freedom to hold to, as places like Australia and the United States and around the world, in the West especially, we have let China get away with all kinds of things where it is most dangerous to fight them. And it looks the bleakest. We've got young people and some not so young people risking their lives for freedom and democracy. My hat's off to them.
Thank you for tuning in to This Week in Common Sense with Paul Jacob. Paul can be found 5 days a week at thisiscommonsense.com with a new commentary each day. On the weekends, this podcast. My name is Timothy Virkala. You can find me at locofoco.net. This podcast is available at SoundCloud, Stitcher, and other podcast servers.